case, state autonomy and democracy over private property, as long as there was just compensation. The other case in which the result made him sick was medical marijuana. He had written for the majority that because Congress had the power under the Commerce Clause to control all transactions in controlled substances, including marijuana, ancillary to that, it could control growing it at home and possessing it, just as in an earlier era it had controlled growing wheat at home for home consumption. And there was no exception for California, even though he would have voted for the California exception. Were he in that legislature, he would have voted to exempt states that had medical control of domestic use if he were in Congress. And what's most intriguing about that case is that the dissenters were Rehnquist, O'Connor, and Thomas. None of them are potheads, so far as I know. None of them love the idea of grass, even for medical purposes. Unlike Stevens, who was with the majority, they would undoubtedly not have voted for this exception. So what drove them? Well, they believed in states' rights to a greater degree. Why then didn't Scalia join them? Scalia joined Stevens. Well, that's because although Scalia was with them on a number of other states' rights cases, it turns out that you can parse his views even further through another axis. The lesson of all of that, especially in a technological era when the permutations are going to be even more different, when the fetus is not going to be inside the woman so that her bodily integrity is involved, but in a laboratory, so that the genetic claims of mother and father are more on a par, where stem cell research and brain implants are going to be the issue rather than many of today's issues, to try to put a justice who will serve for 40 years against the template of a set of values of today, especially against the backdrop of the lesson that we learned from Stevens, that one's substantive values may be quite out of kilter with one's views about axes of constitutional dimension, like the federal-state axis, the property-community axis, the individual autonomy government power axis, would be a profound mistake. So what do we have to go on? Dispositional qualities, qualities of brilliance, qualities of apparent flexibility and pliability of mind, qualities of not being utterly doctrinaire, qualities of having a degree of pragmatism that enables one to adapt to the changing times as the Constitution itself must. And those qualities, I think, Roberts has in abundance. There's no way that most Democrats can vote for him anyway. They can't, because by voting for him, they would be sending, like it or not, a signal to the president that says, okay, no matter how close we think this guy is to Scalia, we're all for him, which in effect says, okay, send us Janice Rogers Brown, or the most far-right person you can find. Of course, David Brooks has a theory, and this is interesting in itself, a theory that says, you got to vote for him, because if you all vote against him, or many of you vote against him, that will send him the lesson that you guys aren't worth talking to or compromising with. I might as well send you the furthest right person I want. Well, I think what that proves is more about David Brooks' brilliance as a political rhetorician than it does prove about the way politicians actually think. In any event, there is quite a gap between what I think a self-respecting Democrat is bound to think is right in these circumstances, and what I think from a more Olympian perspective, not having any loyalty to a party one perhaps is entitled to think. And with that, I should stop and take questions.
Thank you. We have time for a few questions. I'd like to ask students especially to have first crack at this, and anybody who is interested in asking a question, please come up and use one of the microphones. Are there questions from the audience?
Somebody has to surely have a question. But if you could come up to the microphone, that would be great. Well, that's fine then. You can stay where you are. And rightly or wrongly, I'm going to take people's movement toward the exits is not a sign of protest, but that you've got other things to do, and I understand it. I don't think it's at all rude.
Thank you for your hopeful comments. My question actually goes to a quote we heard during the hearings: does he get it? Does he get it? And reflects on your comment about Clinton, the definition of is. In the hearings, looking at the Constitution and anticipating judgments, are we not troubled now by the meaning of words and dealing with words and the ambiguity of them in our time? And this reflects on a century of philosophy that asks, we've got troubles with words, and words are becoming buzzwords thanks to journalists, and so there are a whole bunch of words you can't use, and then there are words you can use, and so now in defining a candidate, we say, does he get it?
Well, I don't think there's ever been a time when discourse has not been both impoverished on the one hand and enhanced on the other by shorthand. Shorthand has sometimes been concocted by and expressed at sharply divided strata of the society and the culture, so that the shorthand in certain forms of upper crust, polite, rich society didn't quite resemble the shorthand of various parts of the working class. And the shorthand today of the old rich in Nantucket may be different from the shorthand of the new rich. It seems to me that we haven't necessarily witnessed over the decades, if not the centuries. I'm not able really to reflect on the centuries in quite the same way as I am on the decades. I don't think we have really experienced a degeneration of discourse so that more buzzwords substitute for thought than was the case before. I don't know that that's the case. I suppose one of the characteristics of buzzwords is that for a while, before they become stale and begin to stand for so much that they stand for nothing, is that we do sort of know what they mean. And I think there was a time, I don't know if we still are in that time, when saying, does he get it, meant, is there the kind of empathy with the surrounding circumstances that enables us to trust this person to act like a human being and not like a Martian who simply is equipped with the variables to plug into some supercomputer? Shorter and quicker to say, does he get it? Now, if you mean, do I think Roberts gets it, I guess I would retreat behind the notion that by now it means so little I'm not sure what it means. What do you mean by get it? But I don't want you to necessarily tell me. Yeah, yes.
Cass Sunstein and Jeffrey Rosen of the New Republic have made the argument, it seems that in your lecture you also made this argument, that Judge Roberts or Chief Justice Roberts would be a fairly non-ideological judge, a very pragmatic judge, kind of like along the lines of O'Connor. But there's a competing argument that says that Roberts would actually be a more dangerous conservative judge because he's more collegial than, say, Scalia or Thomas, and he's able to get along with the other justices, and he would be able to form compromises and coalitions to advance a very conservative agenda. What do you think of that argument?
Well, first of all, I guess the initial proposition, which Cass Sunstein and Jeff Rosen and others have advanced, that there is this breed of judging, which Sunstein has described as minimalism, which I think Rosen describes as incrementalism or gradualism. It's not a new buzzword. I mean, it's been thought from the beginning that there are more and less bold and risk-taking judges, all within a common law style, some more prone to formulating broad principles and others narrower ones. And I think it is very dangerous to make generalizations about which of those two tendencies, and I'll come in a minute to gregariousness and affability, but which of those tendencies, the tendency to be a